Hello, welcome to the New Stack Makers, a podcast where we talk about at-scale application development, deployment, and management.
GitLab is a single application for the entire software development lifecycle. From project planning and source code management to CI/CD, monitoring, and security, GitLab helps enterprises deliver software to market at new speeds.
Welcome to the New Stack Makers podcast. I'm your host, Richard McManus. On today's show, we'll be discussing the struggles of the cloud with two executives from GitLab, Brendan Jung, VP of Alliances at GitLab, and Pete Goldberg, Director of Partnerships at GitLab. Both have extensive experience working in the cloud ecosystem, so I look forward to hearing their insights on both the struggles and the solutions. But first, the struggle is real, folks. The Cloud Native Computing Foundation landscape map has over 1,400 cloud native projects listed on it, and there's many categories as well. The total market cap of the cloud native ecosystem is $18.66 trillion, which gives you an idea of the scale of cloud business now. So as companies continue their inevitable migration from legacy IT systems to the new cloud native world, they have a mind-boggling number of choices to make. And it's not just choices about cloud infrastructure and tools, as we'll discuss, but it's also how they run their IT projects in the cloud era and how operators and developers are increasingly working together using the DevOps approach. So let's dive in now and find out how this cloud struggle is playing out and what enterprises should expect going forward. Welcome, Pete and Brendan.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's great to talk to you. So first of all, let's start with how GitLab fits into this CNC landscape. Brendan, do you want to give us some context there?
Okay, we'll try and make this simple. Actually, it's pretty simple. Our primary job is to serve as a bridge for companies or developers from a world that they're used to developing, and that might have been in a traditional VM-based environment, even a bare metal, mainframe environment, into the world of CNCF. So GitLab is a single application for the entire DevOps lifecycle. And so we live and can meet developers on the platforms where they are, with the language where they are, and then help them the same process, same tooling, the same interaction that they might be using today is the exact same tooling that they can use to go deploy that into any Kubernetes cluster, a serverless option in a Knative, like you name how you want to tackle it. That's what our mission. That's what we spend our time in, is helping bridge that gap. Additionally, you can run GitLab on top of a Kubernetes cluster. So oftentimes one of the first places as people are approaching, as you highlighted, what is a extremely complex ecosystem is, where do I start? How am I quickly productive? And so one of the places we engage a whole lot with is with all the, say, Kubernetes distros. So anything from an EKS to a GKE to an AKS to OpenShift to Tanzu to Rancher, you can run, and the first questions usually people is like, hey, I've got a cluster, step one. Now what do I want to put in it? You're like, GitLab, you can put GitLab in it. And you learn one of the primary pieces that people, if you're newer to containers, for example, really want to get their heads around is, what's the purpose of a container? How is this different from VM? And one of the best use cases for containers is pipelines and testing. And so they get to use that right out of the bat with GitLab. The process of building those containers, the process of testing those containers, the process of a Kubernetes cluster scaling to do all of that for you when you're running a bunch of tests and pipelines. And so it's kind of like an introduction. And so it's that bridge in kind of all ways to CNCF.
Great. And so, Pete, I understand that GitLab is cloud agnostic, but do you partner with the big cloud platforms? And if so, how do those relationships work?
Yeah, we definitely do. And I think when you think about agnostic, is what we're doing is we're saying to the customers who are looking to consume public cloud or to run their private environments is, by being that agnostic tool, is we focus on creating a first-class experience to deploy to all of the different cloud providers. And doing so, it's super important because they're going to make a cloud choice or multiple cloud choices, and they're going to want to build and develop the same kind of processes internally in order to be able to do their workflows as they build in their DevOps processes. I think we look at it from a perspective of we kind of split it up amongst a couple of us, and we each work with a different cloud. My background's with AWS, so that's who I am primarily focused on. And so when I work with AWS, we're really thinking about some customer who's chosen AWS and trying to figure out how do we create the best user experiences for them, and making sure that we work well with the different services that they offer. And my colleagues that support some of the other larger cloud environments, they're in the same kind of mission and motion with those cloud providers.
Excellent. And Brandon, you've got a background in other cloud companies as well, and you're also a Linux Foundation board member. So what are some of the challenges that you're seeing in the cloud native ecosystem as you talk to people that you used to work with perhaps, and also other industry insiders?
Well, you hit a little bit at the beginning. The first piece that I see most commonly is how do I digest the innovation and everything going on, largely in the CNCF space, is largely, of course, in the infrastructure space. How do I digest it? How do I consume it? And how do I not get stuck creating a lot of great infrastructure that doesn't deliver an end business value? And so, particularly when a company's first approaching it, the first thing I think that they're trying to solve to is, do I have a fast way that I can use a platform? And they'll have chosen that platform, as Pete highlighted. The most common places are clearly managed Kubernetes environments on public clouds. That's usually where they're starting. And how do I quickly get an application in there securely? How do I plan for it? How do I then deliver that business value? Because otherwise it's a science experiment. And as a developer, if you can deliver on business value, then in fairness, a lot of developers hey, they love their toys and they love building. They need to tie the two together. So I think that continues to be time in and time out when you're at the conference, or you're just talking to someone approaching cloud native. It's, where do I start? How do I get something productive without getting stuck in the weeds? I need to justify that, particularly if I'm in a company. I need to justify quick value for the investment. And so that's the place that I think could be overly complex, but that is absolutely the first place that is most important to all the projects. All individually want to figure out how to quickly see that get a customer value or developer value. And so I think when I look at it, that hasn't been any different. I think it was pretty simple. Part of the first team that founded it, when all you had was CNCF equaled Kubernetes, yes, okay, I got it. Well, now, you have service meshes, you have 8 service meshes, 10 service meshes you can choose from. And so I think that choice is certainly something it's impressive, but it's uber intimidating. And I think that'll continue to be the most important piece to solve. And it's kind of front and center when we think about it. That's what we think we can help with.
Excellent. And Pete, prior to GitLab, you worked at Amazon, as you mentioned, and AWS for about 7 or 8 years. What did you learn during your time there about the business of cloud computing, and what prompted you to make that jump to GitLab last August?
So I guess that's a 2-part question. So I'm super excited to be at GitLab, and I had a spectacular time and run at AWS. It was probably the most remarkable experience of my career, just going through the years that I was there and through the growth of cloud. And I think what I really learned about the cloud business is that it empowered every developer and every company to be in control. And it empowered experimentation. The cloud gives you dynamic resources. It makes things easy to spin up and tear down. You're not making necessarily long-term commitments. And what you've really done is you've now created an environment where builders, as Andy used to refer to them all the time, or developers, can go out and build and try things out and see how they work, and test and fail and do all those things without having to make these huge commitments. And I think that mentality has started to change, and you've seen that through all of these, born in the cloud type companies and these legacy companies that are now reinventing themselves. Is really the agility in the cloud to have experimentation. is really, I think, what's changed the industry the most. My leaving, that was a long time to be at Amazon. Awesome place, hard place to work. But Brandon kind of made it really interesting.
It only took like a year and a half of trying to convince him.
Yeah.
Amazon, he loved Amazon, so it took a lot of work, but it was well worth it. It's been a blast.
Yes. So I'm happy I made the jump. Lots of different things, but I'm still engaged in the ecosystem. Part of what my whole role during my entire tenure there was helping businesses grow with Amazon. And that's really what I'm doing. I'm just doing it from the other side now and trying to really take that out to others and help companies like GitLab be able to really build a business that supports that customer base.
Excellent. And so let's look at this now from the developer point of view. We're increasingly hearing about how developers are struggling to adapt to the DevOps culture, and they don't necessarily want to be involved in operational matters. They just want to code. So how does GitLab address this developer experience? Brandon, perhaps you could talk about that a little bit.
Sure. So I think if I choose one word, the word is visibility. And it's visibility for as much the ops team and the dev team. And so we stumbled on it. Wasn't really where we originally started. We thought at GitLab when we first started was think of very specific tools that are the best in the space that they are. So do source code management really well. That's obviously we started work called GitLab, and then expanded to CI and then CD and then planning. And so as we've grown, what we found, and I say visibility because as a developer, there's a couple types of visibility, and so they cover a couple areas. As a developer, one, you want the operations team to have visibility into what you've done and what you're deploying, so they can run the pipelines and they can do the blue-green deployment that they can run if that's where your ops team is living. And they can do it with the confidence that they understand what you as a developer have already done. The other visibility is security, and it kind of cuts two ways in the security. So security downstream, the CISO or the ops team wants to know what I'm putting in production has gone through all the security tests. That's important. The developers, they really want to have that security test that they get instantaneous feedback in the continuous integration process of whether their code is secure, whether it's run the tests, where you got license checking, all that kind of thing. Particularly because they don't want to have to answer that question. And this is where they get uber annoyed, or at least I should say I get uber annoyed, and they seem to also get uber annoyed. When 2 weeks later, after I've made a commit, I think it's in production, it's long past my thinking, then the ops team comes back, it's like, hey, you need to go back and redo this. And it's like your teacher coming back and checking your work 2 weeks after you turn the paper in and saying, like, rewrite it. Thanks, but no thanks. And so giving that instantaneous feedback and everyone having visibility allows to build trust, right? So that helps to velocity. But that visibility that ops can see what dev's doing, security can see what dev's doing, dev gets to work in their world where they can move quickly, but it's integrated. That's the part I think that we're hearing, and I think that's what our mission is to pull those together. And you got to do it visibility. You've got to be able to see all and working from the same sheet. It's like word versioning. Word version 3.2.6 that I sent to you, and I'm working on 3.2.2. I'm 4 versions off. I don't know where you are. Like, it's called a Google Doc. Like, put it all in one place. Let's all edit at the same time. We've seen the value of that. Everyone understands that. We're just trying to bring really the same concept across DevOps.
Right. So it's about communication and sort of enabling developers and operators to communicate in real time together.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. And there will be times. The other thing I think sometimes we see DevOps really trying to dev is trying to be ops and ops trying to be dev. And in each deployment, that's going to vary. So it's not like there's an easy cutoff. So if ops runs into an outage, they're going to want to go all the way upstream to who the dev was that was making the commit to help them solve the problem. So that's a lot further up a pipeline than just, okay, was it blue-green? Which one worked on a blue-green? They actually want to go all the way upstream. So it's not quite as simple as like there's not a cut where dev starts, ops start. And so they both need to be able, depending on the company, how you adopt it, each individual situation. Ops may need to get really into dev's business, and dev might need to get to ops business. And in second, you put artificial blocks in there when you've a whole bunch of different tools, you're now trying to operate across silos, and that's slows everyone down. And yeah, so.
Okay, and Pete, what about from the operator side of the coin? How are they dealing with these real-time communication issues, and how does GitLab help them?
Yeah, so I think that's actually the follow-up to visibility is once you have visibility across the organization, now all of a sudden you can collaborate, right? Because when everybody lived in their own little silo, you didn't really have to collaborate or you were playing defense. And I think part of what we're bringing there is that ability to improve the collaboration. And I think about from an ops perspective, the other part I think that we add to ops is structure. I came from a system management background way back in my career, and the most powerful system administrators I ever worked with, the key to their life was this folder of scripts they had that they could go to fix or do anything. And when you start pulling those types of people into a DevOps process, and you give them source code management to manage scripts, right? And now you're building infrastructure as scripts, right? Or as code. And you're doing version control and you're applying those same methodologies that a developer, and you put them next to each other. And now you make it so that the ops side of the house can automate the processes so that the devs can do their job and not be concerned about how it's worked, but and bring those and bridge those together. Now the collaboration can completely happen at a whole nother scale, and people all of a sudden can start moving much faster. And I think that's what we've seen with GitLab with our customers that fully embrace this is when I marry source code with infrastructure as code, and I get it through a pipeline and it works, and then we go through the deployment process, everybody can go faster.
It's been great because if the ops team adopts infrastructure as code, which is another obviously big trend with that we're seeing obviously with in the space, if they adopt it, they functionally lay down they're using the exact same process that a dev is using, right? Get to pipeline to testing to production. And now, like you said, you've literally put lingua franca. They're both, a dev is just doing doing it with app code, and the other is doing it with infrastructure code. And so now we're running this world the same way. We're seeing the same things. It's valuable, and I think that's the place we're seeing huge amount of interest. The infrastructure as code piece is really big. Lot of interest and a lot of good process that people are putting in place there.
Yeah, so and given each of your job titles are partnerships and alliances, I'm just wondering if you can think of some good examples where how GitLab sort of works with other companies in the cloud native ecosystem and to help the DevOps process, and maybe some examples about how that works.
Sure. I mean, we have on the ops side of the house, just because I'm coming off that thought, we do a lot of work with the team at HashiCorp to make sure that people are doing version control correctly and managing their Terraform scripts, since that seems to be the preferred mode. With some of the AWS customers, they're doing it in Terraform, but they're also using CloudFormation templates. But again, it's applying those version controls. And now we're seeing the abstraction layer. We're making it look more like code with Gloomy and CDK out of Amazon. And so we're seeing those 3 or 4 partners just as infrastructure as code, trying to make things easier. And then I'll let Brandon take on some of on the dev side. I think that would bounce us back.
The dev side, the part that we've an interesting spot that we only really started tackling about 2.5 years ago is security in the pipeline. And there's actually a bunch of partnerships there because historically, whether you want to do container scanning or license checking or static code analysis or dynamic or fuzzing, these are all spaces that you needed to do. Everyone knew they needed to do. But if it wasn't a part of a consistent pipeline, oftentimes code would go into production and it wasn't tested. Or back to visibility, the CISO wouldn't know or be able to check like, hey, did I get through this? So what we did is we kind of solved it in 2 ways. One, we truly believe that you need to have full coverage. So you need to have good testing. You need to run all the security stuff all the time, all code. So we're starting with a base level, and we give you all of that in GitLab. But there's also some amazing partners that have been doing this forever. So the white sources, the sneaks, the et cetera, the check marks, all of them have done this for years, and they're very, very good. So what we've got is a security dashboard. So like when they do the work, same thing, it's in the same visibility. So instead of having, you can see like, hey, I did this work with white source, I did all the checks. It says, oh, white source gave the check. It's very clear in the GitLab security hashboard. Everyone knows it got happened. They know that it was done by, so they get all the pluses, but they aren't asking a dev who doesn't want to go switch to another product to have to get out of their workflow, right? And so those are partnerships that we have some great ones started. We're continuing to expand on how we work with the security partners. We want to make sure you always get full coverage with GitLab, and then you can add in whatever you have for security. We help you get the full coverage. And so it's kind of dual prong there, and that's a place where we're spending a lot of time with partners.
Great. And we talked at the top of the show about, how complicated and complex the cloud native ecosystem is at the moment. This is also a very complex technology that we're working with. And I noticed on your website, GitLab offers quite a lot of training content. So in your experiences working with partners and customers, how hard is it to get people upskilled in the more technical aspects of Git and DevOps?
So I think we look at that. I kind of look at that world, and I think about this from my time at a cloud provider is, as a developer, am I coming from a legacy background where I know how to do things kind of in the old world? Or am I already focused on cloud native development, and am I thinking about it from that perspective? And we provide a lot of great training. We record everything and make everything public. It's part of our culture to really help people get enabled with our technology. But I think there's two groups there, and I think this newer generation in the workforce that's kind of only starting with cloud native, the training we're providing them is a little bit different because they're learning how to collaborate, work together in larger teams, or be part of a bigger organization, or think about security. And then I think there's this other group that has been building and developing software through some older processes and methodologies. And a lot of what we're seeing there is, yes, the learning Git, but I don't think that really is always the most challenging. I think it's some of the larger cloud native concepts that are taking longer. And today we have great partnerships with VMware around what used to be called Pivotal, and with Red Hat in the OpenShift world. And today one of the real big value props they bring is they help those people in the legacy world and move into the cloud native world. And so we're also really good at helping those developers build pipelines, and again trying to take some of the complexity out by letting ops build it for them. I think that's pretty much where we look at it in that world.
Yep, and we spend a lot of time. So we have training. We try to do a lot of training in context too. So we'd love to do trainings with Amazon around Lambda. So taking something that you want to do as a developer, doing it in context of how you do that with GitLab, from writing your code to all the way getting it into Lambda, or Google into Anthos. And so trying to also make sure that they don't live separate, and that you're accomplishing a task that while you're going through the process. So it's not like, oh, I learned Git, but if I learned Git, but I didn't know the pipeline, I didn't know progressive delivery, going through those processes, I didn't know where it deployed, you are helping from a training standpoint, because a developer might not care a lot if it was a VM's a VM's a VM. But if they're running something in Lambda, it has some implications to how you write the code. It's going to have implications to how it runs, et cetera. And so those need to be kind of tied together. And so while we do training, we like to try and do it in a hands-on, take you through the whole process, get to implement a problem you're trying to solve. And that covers, end to end. And so that's another area we try and focus on is just meeting that they want to deploy it and try and make it real contextual.
Yeah, and I suppose because this whole space is moving so fast and things change very quickly, and I know developers have a lot on their plate these days, and a lot of things that they're constantly having to learn and relearn. So I guess training is almost kind of an inherent part of the process of being in this world, isn't it? You constantly have to make sure that you're up to date with all the new technologies and how things are changing.
Yeah, and I think we also see a lot of that too. We've been doing a lot of different webinars where we'll do some joint things with different partners, and we've seen a significant lift, especially during the current situation where people aren't leaving their homes as much. There's been a ton of interest in especially more educational content that we're doing, real time based on current trends and topics that we're seeing in the marketplace, and they seem to get really good traction, and it just kind of amplifies the message that this is what people are looking for today, and so we're trying to address it the best ways we can.
Right, and so security, you've mentioned that a couple of times already, Brandon, but it's a very prominent theme on your homepage at the moment, and the message being to shift left and resolve security vulnerabilities earlier in the DevOps lifecycle. So I wondered if either of you can give us an example of how one of your customers has made this shift left and what sort of benefits it provided.
Yeah, so I think we see that across an awful large number of our customers, whether they're using, our native scanning engines that we've built into GitLab, or they're bringing tools that they're comfortable with or already have investments in. And there's very few customers that I can think of that aren't trying to do that. WAG Labs is one that I think about that we did some talks with at the end of last year that remind me of that story. But really what we're just asking customers to do, because for years we've known this, is the earlier in the development lifecycle that you can identify a vulnerability or a problem, it's significantly less expensive to fix. And vulnerabilities now, when they happen, there can be huge implications. So everyone has a big spotlight on security and how do you do it. And as customers are migrating to the cloud and refactoring applications to run into the cloud, and the different security model that cloud has versus the traditional on-premise model, we see it as a huge part of it. And part of what we're seeing is in giving developers the ability is every time they're checking in code, every time they run a testing pipeline, security is part of that testing. Just like I'm unit testing, I'm scanning for vulnerabilities, I'm scanning for the STASI test, the DASI test, and being able to understand, do I pass those things before I even get through my testing phase, so that developer now becomes much more aware of those things he should coding for, but also has to fix them, right? And then what happens is all of us as consumers of these different applications, whether they're things we use for business or things we use for pleasure, right? We can all feel more comfortable, and we have less, breaches and vulnerabilities and hacks, and we still have them. So we know people need to do more, but the more you test early, the safer our applications become.
And this ties to your actually previous question about training. This is like hands-on training, right? So training someone going through a big security process, they should know it. Like, hey, good base level for every developer to understand what all you need for security. But if you can get the instantaneous feedback around where you've coded and where that security is off, or even if you're going down to basic linting, like, hey, I'm a new developer, and hey, is it a spaces? Am I at a spaces or tabs place? Well, I've always been tabbing, and you go through and it cleans it up, walks you through it. It helps the code bases of any company get more in line. It gives instantaneous feedback, and we all work best when we get quick, instantaneous feedback around the work we're doing. And so some of that training is a good pipeline becomes great security training. And naturally, again, it has all sorts of downstream, but it actually is upstream to making developers stronger. And it's also nice, let's be honest, because I'm a terrible developer, for example. I love getting feedback on my pipeline that it failed without having to tell the world that it failed, right? So I may have to run that pipeline. I don't want to admit how many times I have to run a pipeline sometimes to get it to pass. But I get to do that on my time and iteratively and get better. And so there's an aspect there that we think from training is pretty cool. And as long as you're able to do that, get that level of detail as developer feedback, it's almost like someone doing it's your CISO looking over your shoulder, but you didn't have to. You don't have to tell her, hey, I'm sorry, I screwed up again. You get to get the feedback. You get to do it again. So there's some parts there that really help both with the culture and the security mindset and the training in the way that we're trying to continue to set this up. I think there's a lot more we can do. So it's just beginning to scratch kind of the surface of that space.
Excellent. And GitLab itself is a software company, obviously, and a cloud company. And it's, you've grown quite a lot over the recent years. You've now got 1,200 team members in more than 65 countries, according to your website, making it the world's largest all-remote company. So clearly, in these pandemic times, you've got a lot to teach the rest of us. So I wanted to kind of pick your brains about some of the key things that DevOps teams need to get right when working remotely. Brandon, do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure. Lots of thoughts. I spend probably probably a third of my time talking to companies right now about this. So GitLab, we've done this. And so context-wise, we started as we had an office for roughly 4 months and have never had another office again. And so everyone does work from home. That process forces some disciplines that are good for a company, and they happen to apply pretty well to a DevOps or development space as well. But if you're operating with 65 countries and everyone's remote, there's no such thing as a water cooler. So everything that you're thinking that you want to starts, for example, for us in an issue, right? In a dev, this is pretty simple, similar to a dev, but it's interesting. Everything in GitLab we think of as a company starts as an issue. And that means you've spent the time to think about what you want to discuss. You've written it down, and now everyone can contribute. And so that's our core value. One of our core values is everyone can contribute. But here's the thing: most companies, not everyone can contribute. Not because people wouldn't love everyone to contribute. I don't think someone's philosophically against people contributing. The problem is they don't have the data. They don't have the context. And so when you go to all remote, writing everything down, making sure that it's in a place, a single source of truth. And for us, that's something called our handbook. It's public. It's how we do everything from acquisitions to marketing, et cetera. So feel free to go use it. We encourage the world to copy. It's about 4,000 pages of excruciating detail on just about anything you want to do to run a company. A lot of it we've done well, and it's never ending though. So just like the DevOps culture, the handbook is done, but it exists, but it's never done. And so everyone can edit it. Everyone's expected to. If you find something, if it's a word's wrong or the vocabulary's a little off, like go change it, make the smallest change possible. And so that's a lot of what we have spent a lot of time with engineering teams. And I'm actually pretty encouraged. One of the upsides we think, and we're biased, but we're seeing it, is that once you have to go to all remote, it requires that a lot of the decisions being made, the way that you get input, you get a couple things that are really interesting. If you get a big group, for example, I'm just going to take this example and people feel this because you've been there and I'm that person. If you have a large group with a number of people, the voice that gets heard is the loud, obnoxious one. Mine. I usually get heard. What you miss is you miss all the amazing input of those people that have the context, but might not be as willing to jump in. So the person with the highest title, most opinionated, if you're in an office, that's whose voice gets heard. If it's written down and anyone can contribute anytime and everyone can see it, the best idea wins. And we think that's awesome. So when we think about this, I think this is an opportunity and we talk about diversity, so it's great for diversity. This is amazing. Working from home opens up and levels a playing field that is great for women, for minorities, for people living in geographies that are different. So that levels it. It also is an area that we haven't thought about, like neurodiversity, right? I'm going to be heard in an office, but what about the person that's quieter? They won't be heard. Now that they're from home, guess what? They are. If we write it all down, their input, their point of view gets much bigger. And this is pretty consistent. We've seen this a bit in CNCF and open source communities have successfully been able to do this for quite a while, but it hadn't applied as much to companies because they could always default to putting everyone in the same place. So anyway, those are just a few of the places we're pretty excited about. We have a remote playbook that anyone can go use, copy. Our only ask is like, copy it, use it, and then where we're wrong, please tell us, because there's a bunch of stuff we need to get better at. So you're going to find something, just tell us, and then we can publish it and other people can use it. And so in that iterative open source manner, the way we operate as an open core company is the same as you might expect from CNCF or the Linux Foundation.
Excellent. And just a quick additional question, Pete. I mean, how does it compare to your time at AWS? I mean, in terms of working, with a large remote company, because I'm sure AWS had lots of offices around the world.
Yeah, and so early days when I started at Amazon, everyone was really in Seattle. I packed up and relocated 8 years ago or 9 years ago now, and moved to Seattle to work there. And it was a very in-office culture. And today in my interactions, over time it grew, and they have people everywhere now. But there were lots of, a couple teams that I sat on where, not being in the office and being remote was detrimental. You just weren't always a part of everything, because you would have a general manager or someone who would just kind of grab everybody in the hallway and say, hey, let's go talk about this. I have this idea that came out of a meeting, all excited. And you just sort of spontaneate, that message. And the similarity is Amazon, we wrote a lot. You hear the rumors about no PowerPoint. I've struggled to build slides since I left. I'm used to writing narratives. We write a little differently, and the way we structure it, it's a little bit more, it's not as intense. But I actually like to write, and I think part of what I liked about GitLab and part of what I've enjoyed in the workflow is there is this element of actually writing and writing in full sentences, not 3 bullet point slides. And but it's definitely different from the fact that, remote means it's not just, and I think when you hear about Zoom, people with Zoom issues that, I'm tired from Zoom, it's because they're trying to pretend they're in the office on Zoom. And that's not really working remote. That's just the work from home model, right? Where everyone's trying to be the same. And part of what we do, because we write, everything's done asynchronously. And so you really don't have to be in every meeting, because everything is written down, and you can go back and read, the notes from a 45-minute discussion, in 5 minutes. And if you have questions or comments, there's a way to address it. And it's not expected to be everywhere. So people are constantly going back and looking at those notes and saying, all right, where have people updated it? Where have people asked new questions or put in a new point of view? And being all remote kind of forces that, versus, again, it being, who happens to be there. And, I happen to be opinionated, so I usually get heard, but I'm not always right. But this way seems to be much better. It's one of the parts I really like about being at GitLab today.
Yeah, I have to say for myself, I was always one of those quiet ones in the back who, didn't have the confidence necessarily early in my career to speak up. So this kind of remote way of working, which I've done for the last 15, 16, 17 years, is actually really great for me personally. So thank you very much. So there were some really interesting insights there in that last question. And it's been a fun conversation all around. So my thanks to Brandon and Pete from GitLab. You've been listening to the New Stack Makers. And if you have any thoughts on today's shows about DevOps or anything, or any of the struggles of the cloud that we've talked about today, you can find us on Twitter at the New Stack and on LinkedIn and Facebook. And we certainly welcome your feedback. So thank you again, Brandon and Pete, and we'll see you next time on the New Stack Makers podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Listen to more episodes of the New Stack Makers at thenewstack.io/podcast. Please rate and review us on iTunes, like us on YouTube, and follow us on SoundCloud. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.
GitLab is a single application for the entire software development lifecycle. From project planning and source code management to CI/CD, monitoring, and security, GitLab helps enterprises deliver software to market at new speeds.